Make sure your doors are locked. Have you checked under the bed? Now it's time for Raven's Spooky Stories.
Hey guys, welcome to Raven's Spooky Stories. Are you ready to be scared? Have you made sure to check under the bed? Is the door locked? Is the window closed? Have you put the parents to bed? This is too spooky for them to listen to. So when you've done all that, sit back, relax, and get ready for a scare. A Most Unpleasant Child by John Cleworth. Leofric was a most unpleasant child. He had never willingly helped his parents on the farm. "Leofric, would you help me slice up the vegetables, please?" his mother would ask. "No, I can't be bothered. I'm too tired to help," Leofric would reply. "Leofric, it's harvest time," his father would call out. "Please come and help me gather in the crops from the field." "Do it yourself," Leofric would grumble. "I want to go ride my horse." And off Leofric would go, on Jasper, his jet black stallion, kicking up clouds of dust into his father's sad eyes as he sped off into the distance. He would delight in making Jasper run over the huge snake pit where father trapped many of the deadly snakes that slithered onto the land, lest they should make their way into the family beds at night. But Jasper never faltered. Leofric suspected that Jasper's heart was as black as his pelt and dark as Leofric's own thoughts, and he would smile crookedly. One night, Leofric was lounging about in bed, scratching his belly and waiting for his poor old mother to fetch his supper for him, when the smell of cooking turned to the smell of burning. "What's going on?" Leofric muttered. "I hope you haven't burnt my food, you hopeless old woman." But he didn't bother to get out of bed to find out. He heard his father yelling, but he couldn't tell what he was saying, and to be honest, he didn't really care. Then he heard the clattering of pots and pans, and something that sounded like a whooshing noise, coming from the kitchen. Then came the sounds of screaming from his parents. "Oh bother," grunted Leofric, and he slouched out of bed, shuffling to the landing, where he looked over the rail to see the kitchen in flames. The staircase was cut off, and the exit door from the kitchen was burning wildly. His parents were trapped. "Leofric!" father howled. "Quickly! Jump from the bedroom window to the straw bales below. Your mother fainted whilst cooking, starting a fire. It's spread so fast we cannot escape. Get Jasper and have him kick down the door so we can get out." Huh, more work, thought Leofric, but he did as he was asked, for once. After all, he didn't want to have to cook for himself, did he? That was his mum's job. He dawdled across the bedroom and squeezed himself through the window. Then he jumped. Having landed safely in the straw, Leofric whistled Jasper, who came trotting from the barn. By now, the house was licking the air with yellow tongues of flame, but mother and father still called loudly and desperately for help. "Leofric! Leofric, be swift!" Leofric mounted Jasper with a puff and a pant, and the stallion moved like the wind around the back of the house and the kitchen door. It was as if the great beast knew without being told what was required. But "Wait!" bellowed Leofric. "Let them wait. They should have time to think about their stupidity. We shall jump the snake pit first. Go, Jasper!" And the awesome dark stallion turned like black lightning, thundering across the ground with his hooves, drowning out the sounds of his parents' cries. On reaching the snake pit, the horse took off like Pegasus, seeming to fly across the gaping hole. Leofric squealed with delight as he heard the hissing and rattling of the serpents below in the dark. The beast and the boy landed like an earthquake on the other side of the pit, and the horse began to turn and gallop around the hole, ready to head back to the blazing building. "No, not yet," Leofric growled. "I want to jump again. They can wait." So, in a billow of swirling dust, Jasper spun and prepared for the next run up to the pit. "Go, Jasper!" Leofric boomed like he was possessed by the devil. Jasper flashed darkly across the ground, taking him off into the night and soaring over the chasm. Then he stopped. Leofric was baffled. This could not be. The humongous stallion was hanging mid-air directly over the seething pit of snakes. "Jasper!" he cried, fear now cracking his voice. The horse turned its huge black head around and stared into the terrified eyes of Leofric. Leofric's blood froze. He felt like the horse was looking into his wicked soul. What Leofric saw next chilled his blood. Twisted horns sprouted from the horse's head, and the familiar black eyes glowed fiery red. "Come, come to us." The words came in a chorus from the writhing snakes in the dark, dark pit. Jasper bucked in midair, and Leofric was sent hurtling into the hungry hole below. Jasper kicked down the blazing doorway, and Leofric's parents ran out, safe, just before the roof caved in and the house was lost to fire. The flames raged noisily, deafening, and Jasper whinnied loudly so that the parents' cries of "Leofric" could barely be heard. And far down the fields, blowing in on the wind, could be heard the awful hissing and spitting of 100 vengeful snakes in a dark, dark pit. Well, that one was scary. I don't know about you. I think I need to lift my feet up off this chair so that no snakes come out from beneath and try to get my feet. You may want to do the same. Now on to the next tale. Let's see if this one's just as spooky. Our second story of the day, Be Home Before Dark, comes from Lynn Phillips. It'll be dark soon. We better head home. My parents don't like me being out after dark, and Grandpa says goblins grab little children that stay out against their parents' wishes, Ben said. Sam, his friend who was visiting for the holidays, laughed. "You don't believe in goblins, do you?" "No, but I pretend to humour Grandpa," Ben replied, joining in the laughter. The two boys packed up their fishing gear and headed home. They had ventured further than usual today. They would have to hurry if they wanted to get back before the sun set. It got dark quicker than the two boys realised when black clouds raced across the sky, almost blotting out the sun. "If we cut through the churchyard, we'll be quicker," Sam suggested. But there are gravestones in the churchyard," Ben replied. "What are you scared of? Dead people can't hurt you. They're just a pile of bones now. That's if they're not zombies." Sam rolled his eyes, held his hands out in front of him and pretended to be a dead man walking. "Not funny," Ben said. He didn't believe in zombies, but there was something unsettling about gravestones with their faded words and covered in green moss and slime. However, he knew they would be in trouble for being out after dark, so he said, "Okay, I'm game. Let's go." The last rays of the sun were slipping below the horizon, and the rest of the sky was inky black. It looked like a storm was gathering. The church loomed dark and gloomy to the left, and a row of grey gravestones stood tall and stark in the church's shadow. A tall metal fence enclosed the place. Sam might have been joking with his friend about zombies, but as they walked past the gravestones, the hairs on the back of his head stood on end, and goosebumps formed on his arms. "Race you to the gate," he yelled, and took off running. Ben was a faster runner. He reached the churchyard gate first. The tall iron gates were locked, and the fence was too high to jump over. "Oh no, we'll have to go back," Sam wailed. He didn't relish the thought of going past those gravestones again. "Little boys shouldn't be out after the sun sets," a voice said. Ben and Sam looked at each other, their eyes wide, faces white and hearts thumping wildly in their chests. "Goblins!" they both whispered, getting ready to run. "Would you like me to unlock the gate?" Ben sighed with relief. The church minister stood beside the gate, holding up a large key. "Thank you, Mr. Murgatroyd. We only took a shortcut through the churchyard because we're late. We should be home before dark." The key turned and the gate swung open. "You boys are lucky. I was late locking up tonight. I had trouble with it. I was testing out a new key. Mrs. Martin always locks the other entrance at 6 o'clock. We would have locked you in all night." Ben and Sam looked at each other. The thought of being locked in a churchyard overnight was too much. They raced off, relieved to leave the creepy gravestones behind. The shortcut through the churchyard brought the boys closer to home, but the sun had disappeared and darkness replaced it. By coming through the churchyard, they had to cross the rickety bridge that crossed the brook near their homes. Ben's sister called it the Three Billy Goats Gruff Bridge. She told Ben, when he was only 3 years old, not to cross the bridge because a big bad troll lived under it. Of course, as Ben got older, he realised she was only joking, but he and Sam still called it the Troll Bridge. The narrow bridge, made of wood, with several loose boards and no railing, was difficult to cross in the daytime. Now, in the gloom, it looked even more unstable. The boys were reluctant to step on it, but they were almost home. Sam led, and Ben trod carefully behind him. When they were about halfway across, Sam stopped, and Ben bumped into him. "Did you hear that?" Sam asked. "Hear what?" "Who's that crossing my bridge?" A gruff voice was coming from underneath the bridge. "It can't be a troll. They're not real," Ben said, but his voice sounded unsure and his hand shook. "Are you sure? Maybe they're real at night," Sam replied, his eyes wide and his voice a whisper. They took several more paces. Each step echoed in the dark as the loose boards rattled. "Stop making so much noise. I'm trying to sleep." The voice was louder and angrier. "Get off my bridge, or I'll come up. You'll be sorry you disturbed me." The two boys clung together, frozen with fright, their legs too shaky to move. The bridge seemed longer in the dark than it was in the daylight, and they still had the other half to cross. They took several more steps. Each footstep seemed louder than the one before. "That does it," shouted the gruff voice. "I'll teach you to make such a racket when I'm trying to rest." There was a rustling and grunts and groans from under the bridge. Something was coming up. It was already climbing onto the bridge. The boys could hear the loose boards creak and rattle as something lumbered onto it. "Run!" Ben shouted as they raced across the remaining half of the bridge. Their footsteps were loud, but the shuffling behind them was louder. They dashed for home, their faces pale in the moonlight, and their hearts pounding to the beat of their feet. The thing following them was muttering curses. At the gate to Ben's house, the two boys hesitated and looked back. A large, dark shape pursued them. They raced to the front door and pushed it open, only to realise it was locked. "Help! Help!" they shouted. Grandpa opened the door, and the boys fell into the room, jabbering about being pursued by an enormous troll and goblins from the churchyard, before dashing to hide under Ben's bed, their bodies shaking and their hearts pounding as they huddled together. Grandpa peered into the dark. No goblins or trolls, just an old tramp lumbering along. Grandpa chuckled. He wouldn't tell the boys what he saw. They were supposed to be home before dark after all. So, that was a spooky one. At least I haven't got to lift my feet up from snakes, but I do have to watch out for trolls when I cross the bridge. We have one more tale for you today, and this one is coming from my good friend Cece, over in the crypt. I mean, he is the caretaker after all, the crypt caretaker.
Mistress Raven sent you down here, has she? I suppose you'll be wanting one of my stories, will you? Well, here goes. Here's The Boy in the Park by Callum Pearce. One thing that no human can stand is to go to their grave with an untold story inside them. If you have the right sort of ear, like I does, you can hear them whispering away. Some people walk past graveyards enjoying the silence or the rustling of nocturnal wildlife. I hears the clink of glasses or faint music from parties long since enjoyed. Sometimes the chatter of men in trenches as bullets and bombs fly past them.
Ready, men?
Or even the screams of those whose lives were cut short at the hands of another. Sometimes people's lives are cut short before they ever get to tell their story. Other times they hold it in all of their lives for fear that no living soul would believe them. I collect those stories from them that's passed on, and Mistress Raven lets me tell them to you. You young uns who are brave enough to listen to the tales of the dead. The story I've got to tell you today is perhaps my story as much as anyone else's, as this is what brought me down here to the crypt. I realised it was my job to listen to those tales and pass them on. One dark night, I was tidying up the flowers on my old Gran's grave. Her grave was always so beautifully quiet, on account she told all of her stories when she was alive. She used to love to sit there with a cup of cocoa and tell me all about the strange and wonderful adventures she had in her many years on this earth. As I was working away, taking out the weeds that had crept around her resting place, I felt a small hand on my shoulder. Jumping up, I turned around to see a young man, probably 8 or 9. I could see from the grave that he was standing next to that this little fella had died an old man, but here he was appearing in the body he had when his story happened. He was completely transparent. I could see right through the little fella.
"Excuse me, mister,"
he said.
"Can I tell my story?"
As soon as I nodded agreement, all of the graves in the old church faded out of view. I was in a dark field and I could hear the faint sound of a swinging away in the distance. I could see the young man walking through the heavy fog toward me, looking much more solid than he had in the graveyard. He was dressed in his school uniform, making his way home on a dark winter's eve. It got dark so quickly in the winter around here. If you'd been kept behind on detention, the walk home would seem like a midnight stroll. I could see that he too had noticed the sound of the swing, because he turned and started to make his way to the small children's park behind me. When the clouds moved out of the way of the bright moon, we saw another young lad sitting on the swing, rocking back and forward and back. He was wearing the same uniform as the other one. I figured he must have been on detention too that day.
"You couldn't give me a push, could you?"
The boy asked.
"It's been ever such a long time since someone pushed me."
A young fella from the graveyard walked over and dropped his bag next to the roundabout, and then he approached the one on the swing.
"My name's Bill."
The one on the swing declared.
"What's yours?" "Jack,"
answered my lad.
"Go on then, give us a push."
Jack got behind the young man and pushed hard. Bill swung his legs and kicked himself higher and higher, with Jack shoving him back the other way each time he returned. When he was as high as he could possibly go without swinging right over the top, he let go of the chains and jumped from the swing, landing giggling on the ground in front.
"Shall we have a go on the roundabout?"
he asked. Jack didn't have time to answer before Bill was running towards the old roundabout and jumping on. Jack ran behind him and grabbed the old thing, spinning it round and round before jumping on with him. It kept going round until Jack felt dizzy and sick, and then they both staggered off and waited until the world stopped spinning.
"Come with me,"
Bill said.
"I've got something to show you."
Bill started walking back towards the road. He was walking so fast that every so often he would disappear in the fog until Jack and me could catch up with him. He stood by a tree next to the road, smiling.
"These are mine,"
he said, picking up some toys that sat in a pile at the bottom of the tree. When Jack was standing next to him, he could also see cards and bunches of flowers tucked in amongst the children's toys.
Why have you put all them here?
Jack asked.
I didn't put them here.
Bill replied.
People will leave them here for me. Why would they do that?
Jack asked, but I knew the answer straight away.
Because this is where I died.
Bill was grinning ear to ear.
Come with me.
He grabbed Jack's hand and pulled him into the road. Jack struggled and pulled, trying to yank his hand back and run back to the grass. But Bill was holding him tight.
Stay with me. We can play in the park forever.
Bill begged.
I'll get so lonely here night after night.
Jack could hear a car approaching in the distance, but saw nothing through the thick fog. He wondered if the driver would even be able to see him. He thought about his mum and dad at home waiting for him to return, and this gave him an extra burst of energy. He yanked his hand back from the other boy and ran to the side of the road. Diving onto the grass, he saw car headlights cut through the fog, and a vehicle appeared driving straight through his playground companion. When the car had disappeared into the fog again, he watched as his friend faded slowly from view.
I just wanted someone to play with,
he heard him say as he disappeared. The graves came back around me and the church appeared in the distance. The boy sat down next to his own grave. He told me that from that day forward, every time he'd heard of an accident on that dangerous stretch of road, he imagined that little park filling up with lost boys and girls. He imagined his friend playing happily with them, but he never dared to go back and take a look. He'd never told no one about that night. He was certain that none would believe him.
Thanks for letting me tell my story, mister.
He mumbled.
I can move on now.
Raising the little cap he wore, he faded out of sight. That was when I decided to come and start looking after these old crypts. It's my job now to listen to those final stories and let the dead move on unburdened. And then, of course, I passes them on to you lot.
Thanks for that, Cece. That's all we have time for today, guys. So, until next week, keep things spooky.